period before the war. What war?
Civil War.
Okay, the Civil War. During this time period, and this is where you probably have shown this map before, we have the sectionalism. We have the Northeast and we have what was the Northwest. They kind of combined together to make the North during the early 1800s. We then have the Deep South, where cotton is king. And we have the West as we're expanding out there. We end up with realistically 3 sections, even though I have it as 4, because the Northeast and the Northwest come together. The agricultural area and what we today call the Midwest with the factories and the industry. And how are those areas connected together? Yeah, the choo-choo trains coming. We start out with the canals, and then we get the choo-choo trains coming. Now, I have a couple questions here. Where are most of the immigrants going?
The industrial Northeast.
I think we'll say South and the North.
California?
They're going more to the Midwest.
Well, we got every area covered now. We got West, we got Midwest. They're coming to America, right? There you go. That's the way you...
They're going to the States.
All right, they're not going to the South very much. Why not the South?
Because
Slavery.
Yeah, they have slavery. Because most immigrants, okay, they are taking the lowest jobs. Well, the lowest jobs in the South there. Now, that does not mean that there are no immigrants. Okay, you go like places like Savannah, you have some Irish coming in there.
They went
But
to the north
less
for their
of-
factories.
All right, most of them are coming to the north. You have the Irish going and working in the factories, and this is where some of you had with the Midwest. That's where you have like the Germans coming into that area, and that they were coming more as families. And Scandinavians are starting to come in that area. As the Industrial Revolution is going through Europe, they need less farmers there because they're running out of land also in that area. So that's why some of them would come in. A lot more of them would come in right after the Civil War. But this is where at. Meanwhile, in the West, we do have some immigrants coming, especially to California, with Chinese immigrants coming with the gold rush. There.
So like
North and west.
It's basically, if you want to make it the North, or if you're saying the Northeast, and what was the old Northwest, which today we call the Midwest. Here. But the North is where most of the immigrants are going. All right, transportation systems. What did the North have?
Railroad.
They have the railroads. How else are they getting connected?
canals.
They have the canals. And this is where you have the Great Lakes. Right, the Erie Canal is connecting the Great Lakes to the Hudson River. And all of this is becoming interconnected. So how's the South doing things?
They're not the Gulf of Mexico.
Not just the Gulf of Mexico.
Mississippi River.
Well, not just the Mississippi River.
Slave trade.
They have some roads. Well, they're not transporting with the using the
Silk
slave.
Road.
They are using the rivers. If I had a physical map of the United States, everywhere in the South you have these fingers of rivers coming in. Do you need to make a big long railroad when you can turn around and within probably 50 to 60 miles you got a river? I mean, right here in Inverness, you didn't need to have a railroad here because you have the Withlacoochee River. Take things there, put it on a boat, and you get out into the Gulf of Mexico. If you need to go to Europe, go that way. If you need to go to New England, come around and go. During the Antebellum period, we would have a railroad built nearby here. You want to know what railroad was real important for Florida, built in the 1840s, 50s? Where? No, not that close to us.
Oh.
If you wanted to get on a true train,
East Coast Railroad.
no, that wouldn't be until almost 100 years ago.
Wasn't it made by Bull? A guy named Bull.
No. Well, Plant made the West Coast one. Flagler made the East Coast one. We had to go from Cedar Key up to basically what today is Amelia Island, Ferdinand Beach. What it was is that the idea there was you wouldn't have to go around Florida. We were just having a railroad line to cut across and save time going across it. And that was the big railroad for Florida. The other major railroad we had in Florida, which this is typical of the South, we had a line that went from Tallahassee down to St. Mark's, which is less than 30 miles. And that railroad actually, until the very end, didn't even use a steam engine. They just had mules haul things on rails. And all they did was take things down to where the boats were and then left from there. And that's what happened in the South. You did have railroad, but it would be very short distances, connect to a river, put it on a boat, and then leave. And what ended up happening with the South is you did not have areas that were connected together as much. They were a lot more independent. About the only place that really was connected, if you were on the Mississippi River or the Tennessee River or Cumberland River, where those towns are connected along those really big rivers. Now, it worked for the South. Why would you need to build a railroad? Isn't that a waste of money if you already have a river there? Then that's where, for a lot of Southerners, they looked at it, and that's why when we go back to Henry Clay and his American system, the Southerners are looking at things saying, why should we spend taxpayer money on building a railroad when we can just put it on a boat and float on a river? I have, how was the North becoming united? I think I just said it a little bit earlier. What's happening what are they doing in the Midwest or the Old Northwest?
Agriculture.
Well, they're doing agriculture. What are they doing here? Factories. And then they're connected by the railroads. The food from the Midwest is going to the cities in the East, and then they're making the products that the farmers need. Whether it be the McCormick Reapers, whether it be John Deere's new steel plows.
I thought that's what the North and the South relationship was.
No.
Right.
The South was the South, and this is where the South really, yes, they were buying some things, so they were not buying as much. That relationship's becoming really tight with each other in the North. The South is very localized, and this is where we would have, and that's actually when we get to what is the heart of the problem when we get to the Civil War. Yes, we know slavery is the issue, but the official issue is what is the power between states, and then what is the federal government? Who should be telling people in Inverness, Florida, what to do? Should it be coming from people in Inverness? Should it be coming from Tallahassee? Or should it be coming from Washington, D.C.? And that is what basically Southerners said. Don't make fun of our old people. But that is where that's what was the argument at that time. We're actually going through that argument somewhat with some issues again today, and that's where the Tea Party today says it should be more localized.
Do that too. I think that people in Tallahassee control what.
Right, and again, it comes down to more state powers, and then we have an argument: or it should be Inverness or should be Tallahassee. All right, 1848 to 1850 was a very, very fast-changing time period for America. Gold is discovered. We have the California gold rush happen. California quickly had enough people to become a state, not just a territory. Now remember, they were their own country for a very short time, and then we kind of adopted them in as a territory. California was looking to maybe be their own country. Did we want California to be their own country?
No.
Why not?
Because they've got gold.
Yeah, they have gold. Plus, we know. If California was its own country today, now I don't know the exact statistics for right now, but I know a few years back, they would be the 10th within the top 10. It was like number 9 or number 10 most powerful country in the world. What most people don't realize with California, yes, they have a very large population. They're our #1 state in population in the United States. They are also our best agricultural state. Most people don't think of that with California, but it is. It's very, very good agriculture. Where's our computer industry in the United States centered? Yeah, Silicon Valley, California. So their industry, I mean, this is where California, again, would be basically in your top 10 powers of the world if they were their own country. Now, at that time, they weren't quite that powerful, but all that gold coming in put it where they could have been a powerful country of their own. In the United States, we wanted to make sure. One reason why some people were wanting to make California into 2 states, and California said, no, we're going to be 1 state. And the United States didn't say, no, you're going to be 2. Basically, the U.S. government said, okay, we'll give you what you want. Texas did the same thing. Texas and California, both, we were looking to divide them up into smaller units. And both of them, when they came in, said, no, we want to stay as 1 big one. And that's why California and Texas are so much bigger than other places, is they demanded that they get it, and pretty much if we wanted to have them, that's what they were able to get.
California became a state because of all the people?
Yeah, their population grew, the gold, we wanted to keep it there in it. Now, I have the other question. Were most of the 49ers in support of slavery?
No.
Why not? All those people that rush to get gold.
They want to get
They
that
want gold for themselves.
Now,
Slave Charter.
if you were a slave owner and you had a plantation in the South, and you hear stories about people going and picking up gold out of the river, are you really going to leave your nice plantation house and your living to go to pick up gold out of the river?
Yes.
Why would you do that?
Plantation owners are already rich.
Yeah, they're already rich. They have too much to lose. So most of the people that were going to California, most of those 49ers, were they slave owners? No, there were people that didn't have much to lose. They were people that said, all right, told their boss, take this job and shove it. I'm moving to California. Okay? And so the majority of people that got there were not slave owners. A few were. And when they just said, let's have a vote whether we're free or slave, by a large amount, they're going to be free.
Because they never had slaves.
Right, there weren't very many slaves that
They
moved
didn't
there.
have money to have them.
Right. Well, yeah, most of it, again, you wouldn't do that. So that's why for most of California, it really, even though some Southerners wanted it to be a slave state or divided into two with one slave, one free, most of the people in California said we want to be free. Alrighty, 1848 election. The Whigs get Zachary Taylor. What was Zachary Taylor's nickname? No, he's rough and ready. So he's a Mexican war hero. Alright, if you're a Whig, how do you get a president elected? You make a war hero. Tell him not to say a word in the campaign, and you wave a whole bunch of American flags and say how great William Henry Harrison is or how great Zachary Taylor is. And tell him, keep your mouth shut. And then you win the election. And that's what ends up happening in 1848. Zachary Taylor wins. I have a statement in here. 1850, the attitude of most Northerners on slavery. Most of them were not saying that slavery should be outlawed. They were not saying abolition. They were not saying even emancipation. Most of them were saying is, just let it stay where it is. Don't let it spread out. Now, there were people like William Lloyd Garrison that were more extremist, but most of them just said, and this is where I say on here, think Wilmot Proviso. Just don't let it go to any new territories. Yeah.
If Whigs were anti-Jackson, why were they still around after Jackson? Like, what was their point?
And this is one reason why they have a hard time being there, because there's still, you have the Aurora of Jackson still hanging around. And the Democrats were joined together, and just basically this group. The Whigs were a weird group. It was a coalition that you had some Southern plantation owners united together with Northern abolitionists.
Wait, if you
So when they met together, did they ever talk to the issue of slavery? No, they just ignored the issue. That's what I said. In order to get elected, you said don't talk about anything, wave flags. All right, but yeah, they were just against Jackson. They kind of stayed together because people that supported Jackson's ideas compared to those that didn't.
Why did you become a Whig? Do you just hate Jackson?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say that.
I support William Henry Harrison, and in 2040 we're coming back. Okay, the bicentennial of William Henry Harrison.
Did you like Jackson a lot? Like, did you do all your
I did a lot of studying on Jackson, yeah, but
if you're a Whig, you hate Jackson.
maybe I'm not truly a Whig.
Oh, so you lie.
Maybe I'm compensating. Okay.
Tyler was a Whig and then actually Democrat? Yeah.
All right, Compromise of 1850. Now, this is a bigger section. My old history teacher, Mr. Black, would be really upset that I am not making you learn all 14, 15 sections of it. Okay, he would be disappointed. Like later on, he's going to be really disappointed that when I give you all the alphabet soup quiz and the New Deal, that I'm only making you know like 20 of them when you should know like 50, 60 of them or more. There. But first of all, the Compromise of 1850. If there's a compromise, guess who's involved? Yes, and we have the old guard. Recognize these three guys? Clay, Calhoun, and Webster. Believe it or not, now, this is going to make some of you sad. This is pretty much the end of them.
Yes.
All of them would die within 2 years after the Compromise of 1850. Henry Clay still going. He's the guy trying to get everything to work. John C. Calhoun is literally on his deathbed. During this debate, he is brought in on a bed because he cannot stand up. Now, when he is brought in, he goes and mumbles something, and all the Southerners stand up and clap. They had no idea what he said, but If John C. Calhoun mumbled it, it must be something great and wise, and we are going to praise John C. Calhoun. Daniel Webster is a New England leader. Now, all three of these guys, even though they represent their areas, they did have the idea of trying to stay together as a union. But we then get the new Young Guns. You might recognize some of these names from People Reports and other things. We have Stephen Douglas, Jefferson Davis, and then William Seward. Now, Stephen Douglas kind of takes the place of Henry Clay, and he is trying to do a compromise. The only thing is with Stephen Douglas, you're going to find he's a very good politician too. And he is from Illinois, and he's going to do things that are good for Illinois. Jefferson Davis is our Southern leader. He's actually not that much of an extremist, because the extreme ones from the South would not, even though they were popular, they would not be able to be a good leader. William Seward's from New York, and he's one that will represent the more true anti-slavery
How
movement.
come Clay never won an election?
He happened to run at the wrong time. The one time he could have run in 1840, they chose William Henry Harris.
Average.
So he always just ran against somebody really great.
Yeah. All right, so this is where, okay, this is Stephen Douglas, the little giant, Jefferson Davis, and William Seward. Now, they are working on this compromise, and the South won't do it. Henry Clay, believe it or not, Mr. Compromise, is not able to get a compromiser. The Great Compromiser was his nickname. He was not able to get it. He had worked one in 1820, but he can't work one out now. What ends up happening to this is Zachary Taylor was not being very good with the Whig because he didn't make much speeches at that time, but he didn't like this deal that was coming out. He said, even if you pass it, I'm vetoing it.
Ooh.
So for Henry Clay, even if he does work this out, it's not going to happen. What ends up happening to make this compromise, which we'll get to the three main parts in a second, Douglas takes over for Henry Clay, and what he does is a good job of what we call log rolling in politics. He takes it and splits it up into 14, 15, 16 different sections instead of one big bill. And where Brianna may not like one part, he says, all right, well, don't vote for that part, but vote for this section. And he gets, but Ben will vote for that part, but not this one. And he manages, when he breaks it apart, to get everything voted on, get enough votes and work on things. And didn't have to worry about Taylor because Zachary Taylor eats a bowl of cherries and dies.
Oh, he really ate bad bowl of cherries?
Yeah.
Oh.
Cherries will kill you. Don't eat them.
Was it vegetarian?
That wasn't much of a joke. Now, a few years ago, we'll actually see this on the president's video, they dug up his body to see whether or not, because there's always was rumors that he had been poisoned. Don't ask me how we can, 150 years later, dig up bones and see whether or not they were poisoned, but they determined that no, he did actually eat realistically some spoiled cherries and ended up getting...
Wouldn't it just make them drunk?
Well, no, it's like a food poisoning then, with the bacteria that he got, and ultimately died from it. But at this time, when this argument's going on over politically, this is where some people looked and said, well, someone tried to kill off Zachary Taylor.
It was close.
All right, so Taylor dies. Now, again, Mr. Black, I'm sorry, wherever you may be, haven't seen you for a while. Here are the three main things you need to know. Those of you that want to know the compromise in 1850 and bigger parts than you have. First of all, California is going to come in as a free state. Do we have a slave state to come in at the same time?
Nope.
No, we don't. So what does this break up?
The balance.
Yeah, that balance. And that Missouri Compromise that we had, and for the last 30 years, one slave, one free, one slave, one free. Now we don't. We can't wait because we got to get California in. We can't wait for a slave state to come about. But California comes in as a free state. So, the free states like this. You got to give something to the slave states. They get the Fugitive Slave Act. What is the Fugitive Slave Act?
If someone gets
That's
If
where
they
the
say
laws
they
are
have to
smart.
send back.
Right. If there's any fugitive runaway, any runaway slaves have to be sent back. Of course, what did the North end up passing against that?
Personal liberty
Yeah, it's
laws.
personal liberty laws, which basically said we don't have to obey your laws. Okay, here. But at that time, the South, this is the main thing that the South got. That's why they were so mad about when the North didn't obey it. But a lot of people in the North said morally, I'm not sending a slave back. Even if they escaped, I'm not sending one back. All right, that's against my morals to do. The third major thing that we have is we outlawed slave trade in Washington, D.C. Not slavery, slave trade. The idea was that it would slowly die out. You could no longer buy or sell slaves. You're allowed to have a slave. We literally had a slave auction that you could stand on the Capitol steps in Washington, D.C. and hear a slave auction. Freest nation in the world. Unless, of course, your skin was the wrong color and within earshot of the Capitol building, we are selling human beings. And this is something that the North said we had to get rid of. Yeah.
Why do they think that, like, trying to keep the states equal is going to solve anything?
Well, it wasn't going to solve anything, it's just putting the problem off.
Why do they keep doing that? That's so stupid.
Isn't that the way you take care of problems? You ignore it.
Didn't they think that it was just gonna
They're
go
scared
away
of
after
getting
20
into a
years?
fight.
So do you,
Well, and that's what originally they thought it would die out.
do you think that the Civil War was, like, a long time coming?
In some ways, and this is where actually at the end of this, I actually kind of linked together a lot of things that kind of happened along the way. And when we look back in history, it could have been a short time and never had to be fought, because slavery probably would have died out within 20 years. But hindsight's 20/20. The problem that we have here is we had people that in this time period we were getting to the point that looked like we couldn't do anything. But the compromise actually worked. For 3 years we had a nice calm period. Notice I said for 3 years. All right. Your bracketing dates? Anything about 1854?
Kansas-Nebraska.
And we'll save that for tomorrow. All right. So go ahead and put your notes. Which one of the 1850s? You don't know that. Zachary Taylor dies. Millard Fillmore takes over. Our second accidental president, and realistically, he signs the Compromise of 1850. He is president for about 2 years, so half a term. He doesn't like Zachary Taylor's cabinet. He ends up getting rid of them, having his own. But still, for Americans, we're not sure, all right, what to go with it. He really doesn't do anything bad. He doesn't really do anything good. He's just really, I mean, he does what sometimes you'd think a vice president should do if they took over. He kind of kept the seat warm for the next guy. Okay, but for Millard Fillmore, again, this is where you have the Millard Fillmore Society there, which we'll see after the video whether or not you want to join that. Now, the 1852 election. The Democrats nominate Franklin Pierce. He is truly a dark horse. I can't remember when they did the nominations. They had gone, for some reason I'm thinking it was like 49 or something. It was close to 50 nominations before they finally got to somebody that didn't have enough people that disagreed with them. You kind of get down the list. And basically Franklin Pierce, everyone said, he's a nice guy. What had he done? Well, there wasn't a whole lot to show that he had done. But that way he didn't tick off anybody. Kind of the opposite of Henry Clay. There was at least something Henry Clay had done to upset people. By the way, Henry Clay is dead. All right, or is he? But this is where we have. Meanwhile, the Whigs, how do Whigs win elections?
Why not say
Downplay
anything?
the other person.
Negative campaign.
No, not anything, not saying anything, but who do you nominate in order to win an election?
General.
Yeah, you do a war hero, you wave a whole bunch of flags and don't say a single thing. And that's what they decided to do. They go with Winfield Scott. The only problem is Winfield Scott isn't quite as charismatic as Zachary Taylor, not quite as popular, and a lot of people for the Whigs were looking at things, and by this time they were already starting to die off there because realistically, they were held together by Henry Clay. And when Henry Clay dies, the Whig Party is going down. Free Soil Party. What did the Free Soil Party want? No.
Free
Right.
land.
Free land and land free.
Free.
Remember that. Free land and land free. They wanted basically that the government gives some of that land out west to people, but then also make sure that that land out west is always going to be free. No slavery in the western lands. 1856 election, we will have James Buchanan is elected. Notice we no longer have Whigs. What party replaces Whigs? Okay, Republicans. So we have 1854 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act that makes the Republican Party come about, which finally today we will get to that change in history. But our first Republican is John C. Fremont. He almost wins the election. He would almost win the election, and there the state of New York actually voted Democrat. And we can almost look, if you look at history, the reason why Fremont lost was because of his religion. And there was enough people that were anti-Catholic. It was Catholic. Now, why would Americans, not Mexicans at that time, long time period. One group of people that were people not liking that were Catholic, that were moving into the United States in the 1840s, the Irish. So this is where there's a lot of anti-Catholic feeling along with that anti-Irish feeling in there. But John C. Fremont, there was a lot of people that were afraid, and this is where we would see in American history, and it would happen again in the 1920s with a candidate by the name of Al Smith, that people say, well, if you elect them as president, then they're going to have to take orders from the Pope. Now, in the history of the United States, we ended up with one Catholic president so far. He was our only Catholic president we've ever had. Yeah, JFK. Kennedy was our only Catholic we've ever had. And then you see here, the Free Soil Party, which was still around, but it lost power. Our major third party is the Know Nothing Party. What is the Know Nothing Party? Yeah, that's the anti-immigrants. Why is it that we suddenly have a surge in the Know Nothing Party? The Irish and the Irish potato famine. As the Irish potato famine happened, we now have a lot more people coming. So before we go with the immigrants, this kind of ties in the political side that we would have on there. And I have on there Fillmore, Pierce, and Buchanan considered some of the worst presidents ever. Is that fair? Again, you can kind of look at things. You can state on different parts of it. I don't know if there was anybody that could have stopped the Civil War at that time period, but who knows? Maybe we could have had someone great that did it. Although they're all presidents, who is the most powerful person in the 1850s? Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas would be the one that would, in the 1850s, would set the course of things. When Henry Clay couldn't get the Compromise of 1850, Stephen Douglas does. And then we're going to second have that Kansas-Nebraska Act, and guess who writes the Kansas-Nebraska Act? Stephen Douglas.
So he didn't get elected.
Well, we'll get to the election of 1860, and this one guy by the name of Abraham Lincoln comes along. Okay, and he kind of ruins it for Stephen Douglas.
So what caused the Sumner-Brooks? All the Irish kind?
Yeah, the Irish potato famine. Alright, I have this. This is where I had copied on, but basically where people look at things. The one person that's seen over and over again as the worst president, and it's stated there, is James Buchanan. I don't think I've ever seen a list that he wasn't at least one of the three worst, if not the worst. I'm trying to think of anything that, unless it was totally partisan, there. You maybe get something that's today by Republicans or Democrats. Alright, some Republicans today will have that Obama was the worst. In there. Some Democrats might have it that George W. Bush was the worst, but realistically, and you can't relate it with ranking for them, but realistically with George W. Bush and Obama, for the most part, we almost have to say that they're both so far average. Okay, history might change with what ends up happening in the future. Alright, now we finally get to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. 1854, and this is a year that would make sure. If you remember, we had the Compromise of 1850. It makes things pretty peaceful. That is the calm before the storm. Because here comes the storm with this. We have Stephen Douglas. He pushes this bill through. It deals with the Kansas Territory. So, sorry that we have this on my computer with it, but the Kansas Territory was going to be split between Kansas and Nebraska there in two different territories. And what he did to get this bill done, he had to get some Southerners to support it, or what he wanted in order for it to get here. And the Southerners decided to give up where the Transcontinental Railroad, where we bought the Gadsden Purchase just a year before that. Stephen Douglas didn't want the choo-choo train going down south. He wanted it to go up here because he thought if the first Transcontinental Railroad connected this little sleepy city called Chicago, that it would make Chicago a great city. Now, if we look back in history, was Stephen Douglas correct with what happened with Chicago once the railroad connected to it? Yeah, very correct. Alright, it's known as our second city. Okay, and importance, a lot of people, I know Los Angeles would argue with this, but it's a lot of times in the history, at least in the last 150 years, the second most important history or city that we have to New York there. So Stephen Douglas he was a great senator for his state because what he did for his state actually helped it a lot with making Chicago. Of course, doing something great for your state, does that always do something great for the rest of the country? And that's where we kind of look at things in here. But so what carrot would he use to get the South to give up the train?
Something with slavery.
All right, has to do with slavery. What he would propose, and get used to this word, popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty means, in a really simple definition, voting. Okay, it's one of the principles that we have in America, which is to vote on things. Which, for Kansas-Nebraska Act, what are they voting on?
Slavery.
Yeah, slavery. Remember the Missouri Compromise? All lands above this area were to be free?
Yeah.
Well, the Kansas-Nebraska Act takes away the Missouri Compromise because it says Kansas can vote to be whether it be free or slave. Nebraska can vote to be free or slave. And so this is where we open up Pandora's box. And Franklin Pierce was president when this came through, and really, Stephen Douglas kind of came in and told Franklin Pierce, in one of our weak presidents, you better sign this. So we have a senator basically telling the president what you're going to do. And guess what Franklin Pierce does? He signs it. Okay, he's kind of in office. Okay, really nice guy. We're going to see with Franklin Pierce, he had a very tragic life. Almost everybody involved in his life would end up having something happening to him. His children would die of disease, except for his one son that makes it past all the disease. He's elected as president in 1856, and between the time he's elected and his inauguration, his son's killed when it basically falls down in a train wreck. And so, I mean, this is where, so as Pierce is being inaugurated as president, he has lost his only child. And he would, I mean, there was just one tragedy after another that he would have. I mean, a lot of people look at things on Franklin Pierce and said he had a lot of mental problems, okay, besides being an alcoholic also. But realistically, if you look at his life, okay, yeah, I would have to say you almost want to be an alcoholic for a lot of the things that happened to him in his life. And becoming president ended up not being a great thing. You think about you're elected president, great, and then you lose your only child. And his wife went into extreme depression there, and I believe she would end up dying soon after also. Okay, I mean, it's just, again, his life, it seems like a tragedy once you get to the time period that he has late in his life. And about the time something good happens, like a bunch of bad things happen.
What year was he elected?
He was elected in 52. So this is where Stephen Douglas, though, comes in, and he just basically forces Franklin Pierce around there. Again, Douglas is the most powerful man at that time. Here is what changed. Missouri Compromise is gone. A lot of Northern Democrats have said enough is enough. And this is where they go and form the Republican Party. It forms in 1854. By 1856, they almost win the presidency. So it went really big, quick. So you think about things that we have in here, the Republican Party, so politically, Kansas-Nebraska Act is a major change you're in. This would, for some people, and you could easily use this as a thesis statement, this would be the cause of the Civil War. Okay, the Civil War will be 6-7 years away, but where we had some flame going on here, we decided to throw a whole bunch of diesel onto the fire.
So the reason that he did it, knowing that it would upset Northerners, was to better his state?
Yeah. It's going to help out the state of Illinois. It helped out Chicago. It really did. And this is where, you kind of have to look at this. If you are a representative, are you going to do something for your own state, your own constituents, even though it may not be as good for the country? And this is actually a problem we have in politics today, and one reason why we have where people will go and say, I want any money from the federal government I can get, I'll get it here in Florida. Okay? It don't matter if it's going to increase the national debt. We'll let everybody else pay for that. But if people in Florida are doing that, people in New York are doing that, in Iowa, they're all doing things like that, and it all keeps going with the national debt.
I saw that he offered the thing with slavery to get the South on board.
Yeah, that's where the idea of popular sovereignty, and that's a key word to remember with Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Okay.
From the Kansas-Nebraska Act, we will get Bleeding Kansas. The South saw a chance for Kansas to be a slave state, where California had come in and upset that balance. Well, they can get that balance back. And then they thought Nebraska, but where Kansas is, it's right next to Missouri. So we end up with a bunch of people coming into it. Northerners said, we cannot let this happen. And we would end up, notice I have on there Beecher Bibles. Remember Harriet Beecher Stowe? One of her relatives who was a preacher. He gets people in what is called an Immigrant Aid Society. They got poor people that were living in New England and said, we will pay for you to move to Missouri. You move there, set you up, you can be farmers, and we'll get everything, we'll move you there, get you set up, as long as you make sure you vote that Kansas is free. So we have people recruiting people to move to Kansas to vote whether or not to be slave or free on there. Now the Beecher Bibles were, here's the preacher, you might have to do a little defending yourself, so here's your Beecher Bible, which was a gun. Okay, which in all reality, Bleeding Kansas is the Civil War starting before it officially starts. It gets going in Kansas. We will have, then when they do the first vote, the Lecompton Constitution is passed. Notice how that is bolded, underlined, big. Okay, this is a major SFI to know in here. It would be a pro-slavery constitution. Now the reason why it passed, and here's a word to be familiar with, I don't think it's on your paper with the notes, so make sure you write this SFI down. And here is border ruffians. On the day of the vote, the population, I don't know the population of Kansas at the time, but let's say there was 10,000 people that lived in Kansas. On the day of the vote, about 20,000 people voted. Something wrong with that. Anybody suspicious?
20,000 people don't live in Kansas.
Right. But what happened was a whole bunch of people from Missouri, these border ruffians, crossed the border, moved to Kansas for the day, voted, and then moved back to Missouri. Is that a legal vote? No.
Not really.
And so you can kind of say that, yeah, technically at that time they did not have registration and that kind of stuff at that time, but it wasn't I mean, people said, no, this is right. So the border ruffians are the Missourians, I don't know exactly. So, oh, there we go. So, but they're the ones that came across and voted. It made it where it was a slave state, or their constitution said they were slavery. But more people living there were free.
So what does, I thought you said the Lecompton Constitution was pro-slavery.
It is.
So then that's why the border ruffians?
They came across, voted, and to make Kansas a slave territory.
Then what's the
They wrote the Constitution saying that they were slave, and this is where they then apply, under Northwest Ordinance, they would apply to become a state, but as a slave state.
Because Missouri was a slave state.
Yeah, Missouri was a slave state. So this is where Missouri's trying to go with them. Well, what happened was the people that were anti-slavery said, this is totally wrong, and we will end up with different things happen. We will have the sack of Lawrence, which when Lecompton is a town that's set up as the capital of Kansas, but it's the pro-slavery capital. We will then have Lawrence set up as the anti-slavery or free capital, and they both say that they're the capital of it. They would the pro-slavery group would go in, burn down the town of Lawrence. Okay, sorry for all you Jayhawks in here for KU. But they would burn it down. Meanwhile, then that would tick off the anti-slavery. It would tick off John Brown. And you might remember when we had John Brown for our people, this is when the Potawatomi massacre happened. We would have our preacher and his church go into the town of Potawatomi and drag out the people that supported slavery and kill them. Amen. I think I had that one day in history. I know I've told you the story before with that, but that is where we will have John Brown occurring. And some of you think of the old Wild West and people riding around, that's what Kansas was. All right? You did not walk outside without a gun. You did not have a gun within range of you because you never knew whether you were pro-slavery or anti-slavery if another group was going to come in and have a drive-by shooting. Okay, and that is what's going on for several years. They are fighting each other.
John Brown killed people who was anti-slavery?
No, for slavery.
For slavery?
Yeah, he is anti-slavery. He's killing people. Potawatomi was a pro-slavery town. You can kind of think of it as gangs, different gangs, and they're just going around shooting each other because you live in this, you lived in that town, or you lived in that town.
We hung later in Virginia.
Right, because it'll come up again in Harper's Ferry.
Okay, if it went on for several years, like why didn't the presidents or someone do something?
And here's where we would have something that is done. And this is what some people got upset with Franklin Pierce there, because Franklin Pierce would look at things and he turned around and this is one thing that Franklin Pierce did that was actually right. Things don't happen fast enough sometimes. He appointed a new territorial governor and told that territorial governor, who's a military leader, said, do a revote. We got to have a real vote come in. Now, a lot of the anti-slavery groups were really mad because the governor that he put in was actually a slave owner. But he was a military leader, and if you are true with the military, your job is to protect the United States Constitution and follow the rules of it. And if you get, most people you know, when you get someone, especially if they're an officer in the military, they're going to follow the rules. All right, even if they don't always agree with who's there. You may not agree with the commander-in-chief, but you follow the rules of the commander-in-chief. And when this military governor came in, he came in and when they did the revote, even though he actually supported slavery, he set the military up on the border and would not allow the border ruffians to come in. And when they did a legal vote, then Kansas voted to be free. And ultimately, when Kansas would come into the United States, they were a free state. So, and this is where, and I forget the name of the general that was there, but this is one that's kind of showing that yes, he personally supported slavery, but he was going to do what was right and follow the rule of the law, which is what the United States were supposed to do with the Constitution. But this is where, for several years, we have that going on, and we will, well, results of it. Then I have the next thing on there: creation of the Republican Party, which we had. But for Sumner-Brooks, we will save that for tomorrow, because if you think what's going on, SFIs that you do need to know. Bleeding Kansas, know the Lecompton Constitution. That is the pro-slavery constitution that they proposed, which came about because of all the border ruffians and illegal people coming in to vote. We have pretty much the Civil War fighting in Kansas, the Potawatomi massacre with John Brown. He is upset about the sack of Lawrence, which was an anti-slavery town, but it gets burned down. So he goes into Potawatomi. He kills 5 people there. After all the revoting, eventually Kansas does come in as a free state.
John Brown kills all 5 of those people.
Well, he and his church members, which most of them are his family members.
He was a cult, right?
Well, not officially, but you can kind of look at that and say.
Did he kill anybody though?
I'm not sure if he's the one that personally killed them or not, but he would be like the leader of them.
Bare hands.
Again, the creation of the Republican Party now would form after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and that would be one of the biggest long-term things. Now, in Washington, D.C., after all this stuff is going on in Kansas, here's where we have a little story. There's 3 characters in this story, and this is all a true story. We have a senator from South Carolina who I believe he had some sort of stroke or something like that, but he ended up slurring his words even more than I do. But this is where he had some problem with speaking. He had a cousin who was Preston Brooks, also from South Carolina, but he was in the House of Representatives. We then have a senator, Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, who was very much anti-slavery. Now you're going to see Charles Sumner come back in after the Civil War because he's going to be really important in Reconstruction. But what happened was Charles Sumner was giving a speech about the slavery, and I believe he even had to do stuff with Kansas, and he made a little comment about Senator Butler, basically like the slurring senator or something like that, which those of you that are from the Deep South, we take it where we have to protect not only our mama, but we have to protect other family members. Well, the next day, Preston Brooks goes marching into the Senate, and where Sumner was at a desk. Now, the desk at that time, to make sure that they're all nice and neat in the rows, the desks are all bolted down, and then you have your chairs that go under. Sumner's a pretty big man, but it would be, we have Preston Brooks come marching in. Let's see, we'll have it with Chris. All right, he'll play the role. And he basically comes up while Sumner is at his desk, and again, kind of, it's almost high schoolish here. He has a group of his buddies with him. And he comes up to the desk where Sumner is, and pretty much confronts him about the stuff with the senator, and Sumner looks at him like, all right, what the heck, this doesn't even matter. And then he proceeds to take a hickory cane and hit him. Now, Charles Sumner is trapped under his desk. The only thing he can do is raise his arm and try to stop the blows from hitting him, which most of the blows weren't hitting his head. Which, of course, what are our other representatives that come in with Brooks doing?
Hitting him too.
No, they're not hitting him. They're kind of cheering him on. Kind of like a high school fight, right? All right, so we have a representative, U.S. representative, hitting a senator. Ultimately, Sumner rips out the bolts as he lunges forward to be able to get out of the desk, and about that time, enough people kind of grab a hold of Brooks, and it all ends. Now, for the rest of the story, Charles Sumner would have got some brain damage from that. And it would take him a little time to recuperate. He actually would be slurring some of his words for the rest of his life there. But he goes back to Massachusetts, and he recovers, and actually is gone for most of the next couple of years. Later on, he comes back and assumes his seat. It was a hickory stick, a hickory cane.
Okay, so who was slurring?
Okay, well, originally it was Butler.
Okay.
And Butler really doesn't have a whole lot to do with this, except for he's related to Brooks.
Okay.
All right, that's Brooks'
And
uncle.
Sumner hit Brooks.
No, Brooks hit Sumner.
Oh.
Now, Sumner is the senator from the north.
So did Brooks
Okay.
actually like hurt Sumner?
Yes.
A lot, like,
Yes.
cracked his head?
Yes.
Brain damage.
Now, what they ended up doing is they never replaced the things. But what happened over the next couple of years, because this is in 1856, every time that there would be a speech given on the issue of slavery in the Senate, and some Northerners were thinking about compromise or doing something to work with the Southern senators, if you were given a speech and you were anti-slavery, you would go by the empty desk. And what's the image flashing through everyone's mind then?
They're gonna get the crap
Now,
out of them.
right, and this would be where you would look at that they would look and say, all right, we're not going to compromise with the South. For the rest of the story for Preston Brooks. He was kicked out of his office, all right, because that was punishment for what he did. But they had a special election to fill a seat, which he went back to South Carolina and easily won that seat. He was a hero throughout the South. Sales of hickory canes went up dramatically. He was a hero. Places were named after him, such as some place that is 30 minutes from here.
Sumter County.
Brooksville, Florida is named after Preston Brooks. Okay, and that is where that name comes from here in Florida.
So was this his job, and then he runs and gets it
Yeah,
back?
basically gets his office right back.
So he was mad at Sumner because he was
Made fun of Butler.
anti-slavery?
He made a
Well,
comment
not so much
about-
anti-slavery, but that just helped it there. Sumner was a person giving all kinds of speeches anti-slavery, basically anti-South. But in that speech, he also had made some comments towards his uncle, and that is where we have the family part come in here. Now, it's a pretty interesting story, but the main thing for the story, and this is for the whole big scheme of things, it's not real important, but the reason why I like to spend a little time on it, we're in D.C., we're in the capital, and can we even discuss civilly the issue of slavery? Yeah. So this kind of tells you where we're at. It's one thing to say out in Kansas they're all shooting each other, but now we have it even in our hallowed halls of Congress.
You have to postpone it for longer. Just
It
click
says my
click on the arrow,
and
yeah.
then
4
wow.
hours.
Or 1 hour.
All right. Here's a couple things. Now we got a bunch of miscellaneous things happening here. The Panic of 1857. What is a panic?
Recession.
Okay, so recession. So, and we go through cycles of things. We'd actually done pretty good for quite a while. The last panic we had was 1837. So we have a period of a little over 15 years because the panic just wasn't in that 1 year. It lasted through most of Van Buren's presidency. But we now have, after about 15 years of pretty good time, we have an economic recession. Except for this one was really bad in the north. The South actually survived it pretty good. Actually, the South benefited during this time period. So the North, we have all these people where factory owners are firing their workers or downsizing, as we say today. And in the South, they're actually making more money. And it gave the South a lot more confidence in King Cotton. And here's where, and some of you in your writing have done a good job. I can't remember who it was that wrote, instead of using the word slavery, wrote peculiar institution. Okay? Throw in those terms in your writing. Peculiar institution, King Cotton. In the South, this is when cotton really was king. And this is where Southerners looked at the North and said, we got a better system than you. Look at all of those unemployed people that you have wandering around the streets. And the South, well, we take care of our lower classes. We may not go up as high, we may not go down as low either. And that's where the South figured they had the better system. And that the rest of the world needs their cotton. There was a little bit of a mistake though. Anyone know why the price of cotton went up in 1857? Does cotton go bad? And what happened was France and Britain were anticipating that the United States might go into a war. So these factories in France and Britain figured, well, if they go to war, it'll be hard to get that cotton from the South. So let's buy some extra to keep in storage in case of that. So they bought more, which made it where more demand, which the price went up temporarily in that case. So basically, the South got a false sense of security because Europe knew we were going to be fighting each other soon. But the bad thing was, this is where the South, when they were saying, well, secede, well, let's go ahead. France and Britain, they have to have us. Then we have a court case, the Dred Scott case. It's the most famous of all the Roger Taney cases. What happened with Dred Scott was, and this is a famous picture of Dred Scott. He was in Missouri. He was a slave of an army officer. The army officer had gone into a free territory. I believe it was Wisconsin or Minnesota, someplace there, and took Dred Scott with him. Now, if it's free, should the slave be free? Well, that's what most people thought. Then, not only did he do that, he went into Illinois, a free state, and people were telling Dred Scott, the slave, listen, you're not a slave. We're free. He took you into a free area. They went back. But Dred Scott did what you should do in civilized society. He then went to the legal aspect and he sued, saying, I should be free. I was on free land. Now, here's where it really upset a lot of the Northerners, because what the ruling came down. Roger Taney and the Taney court had said that he had no right to sue. Is a slave a citizen? A slave is property. Roger Taney was a strict interpreter of the Constitution. Slave is property. It'd be kind of like, can your dog sue you? I hate to use that analogy, but using a human with a dog, but that's basically what Roger Taney was saying. Okay? It is property, cannot sue. So basically the case is thrown out. Now the effect of that was, it pretty much said there was no free or slave thing, because if you were a slave, you could be taken to a free area. Now, it wouldn't be a very smart thing to do because it's really easy for a slave to escape if you go into a free state. But for a lot of Northerners, they combined this with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and this is where they're really upset. Now, Roger Taney, to get a little bit for him in history, a lot of people go and point to him as this horrible man as a Chief Justice. He actually had spent part of his own money every year buying slaves to give them ammunition. He would buy them and free them. He personally didn't believe in the institution of slavery. But he felt that as a Supreme Court justice, his own personal belief is not what he did. He had to do by what he figured the Constitution said here. And this is where we look, a lot of times we look at Roger Taney as, oh, this is a cruel guy. He's basically expanding slavery. No, he really, in a roundabout way, he did, but not on purpose. 1858, we would have the Illinois Senate debates. As we have, and this is where at that time the House of Representatives.
What was the effect of
The effect was basically it said that there was no true free or slave states. Free or slave states. Almost one words. And again, that's where the major effect was from that was that for a lot of Northerners, they said, well, we just got to get rid of slavery. All right, if we're not going to have, I mean, not only just try to keep it from expanding, let's make sure it doesn't go any further. All right, 1858, we have the Senate. At that time, it was not a popular vote. The House of Representatives in each state, or the state Senate, the legislator of each state, would choose the senator. But they had a series of debates, which for Stephen Douglas, who is the little giant and one of the most famous people and probably the most powerful man in America, the legislator, no problem with him getting elected. And this new guy comes up that wants to go on debates with him. Stephen Douglas was a great debater. Someone's going to debate against him? Yeah, that's great. And that new guy was Abraham Lincoln. And so they scheduled a series of debates. And this is where we kind of get to modern politics. They have a series of debates, different issues that they're going to discuss at different ones. They didn't have televisions go along with them, but they had newspapers go with them, and then they would report what happened in the debates with the modern communication that they had. As they were going from place to place, Lincoln and Douglas were doing their debates. One place happened, and here's where you need to know the Freeport Doctrine. Put stars by it or something like that in your notes, put arrows. Because at the town of Freeport, Lincoln kind of put Douglas on the spot about his idea of popular sovereignty. Remember popular sovereignty and Kansas-Nebraska Act, to vote whether it be free or slave. And to kind of make it really simple, Douglas kind of let the cat out of the bag. Because he said, what does it matter? All these areas that we're letting the South vote are not going to be slave. I mean, are you going to grow cotton in Nebraska? The Dakotas?
No.
And that's why he's kind of saying, listen, we got them to give up the railroad, which is good for Illinois, in order for them to think they might get a slave state. So basically, Lincoln got Douglas to say, we tricked the South. You think the Southerners like that when they read that in the newspaper?
No.
Now, the short-term effect, Douglas, he wins a Senate seat, doesn't matter with that. But 2 years later, when we get to the important thing, running for president, and Douglas is running for president, is the South going to support Stephen Douglas? Meanwhile, Lincoln, who was unknown, all the northern papers, where he's debating, they got to know Abraham Lincoln. And that is where he became a little more famous. 1859, John Brown is back again. And this is where Harper's Ferry comes in. John Brown decides that slavery has got to end right now, and he and some of his followers go, and now instead of going into a slave town, they go into Harper's Ferry, which is on the border of today, what is West Virginia and Virginia. They take over an arsenal. What's an arsenal?
Armory.
Yeah, it's like an armory, a place that you store the weapons for the army. So it's sort of like an army base storing weapons. They take over it, and their plan was to have the slaves come and get the weapons and go off and kill their masters, and that's the way they were going to end slavery. Let's kill anybody that supports slavery. Amen. And I remember he's a preacher. The problem was when they took over the arsenal, did any slaves come?
No.
No, there's no communication to them. They don't come. Instead, they have to get a guy by the name of Robert E. Lee, who happened to be a colonel that was home, kind of like on a vacation, who lived in this nearby house of Arlington, where Arlington National Cemetery is today. And they had him come in, and another guy that the Civil War was going to come, a guy by the name of Jeb Stuart, had them lead it where they captured John Brown. Now, John Brown ultimately is tried for the slave uprising, and what's the punishment for trying to incite a slave? Death. So he and his followers are then hung to death. There are pictures of it. Now remember, this is where we now have cameras. So So this picture, and for the Southerners, they looked at this and said, see, don't mess with us. But for Northerners, John Brown becomes a martyr. What's a martyr?
Someone dies for their faith.
Yeah, they die for a cause. And he's probably our most famous, insane hero that we have in American history. And later on in the Civil War, as soldiers were marching to battle, they would have a tune to Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, about how John Brown's spirit would go marching on. He died for this cause, but then they would too. All right, now we get to, for some people they say, the biggest election in history. All right, that's why it's kind of funny when some people say this is the most important election in the history of the United States. And when we look back in history, it probably isn't even in our top 5, much less our top 10 when you look back in history. You could argue that this one is one of our top 2 or 3 at least. We have 4 candidates, and you need to know all 4 candidates. The first 2 are Democrats. Wait, why do we have 2 Democrats?
Fighting each other.
Yeah, when the Democrats met for their convention, Stephen Douglas was nominated, and guess what the Southerners said to Stephen Douglas? No. We're out of here. They went and they made their own candidate, which was a guy by the name of John Breckinridge. Now, on this map,
Holy cow.
Breckinridge wins the Electoral College. He wins the southern states. See all that in red? That's what he wins. Stephen Douglas wins those in orange.
Yeah. He sweeped up, didn't he?
Didn't do very good, did he? That wasn't a good idea in the Freeport Doctrine to tick off the Southerners, was it? We then have 2 other candidates. The Republican is Abraham Lincoln. Now, he happened to get sort of lucky to get this up. He was not what most people thought was the best Republican. William Stewart, we're going to have the guy by the name Edwin Stanton. They were seen as the best candidates. But the best candidate in your party may not be the best to win the election. The reason why they chose Lincoln instead of Stewart or Stanton was Lincoln was not quite as extreme. Lincoln did not believe in abolition, or was not preaching abolition. Lincoln's thing that he was preaching was he was more of a moderate, said, let's just keep slavery where it is. Do not let it go 1 more inch. But some Republicans, like Stanton, all right, were more extremist. But Lincoln gave them the best chance to win. Now the other guy, John Bell, and he's the one that wins these states in the middle. We would have what was called the Constitutional Union Party. And the only thing that party had was, we need to have a compromise no matter what. Somehow or another, make sure that we don't fight.
Constitutional what?
Union. What does union mean?
Work together.
Yeah, together. So basically, the whole idea of their party was to stay together. Now, we'll have another union party 4 years later. I'm not trying to confuse you, but we will. But that's where we'll have you. So you look at this map. Lincoln gets all the ones in blue. Breckinridge looks like he does pretty good. How does Lincoln win, though, when you see he has less states than the other 3 guys combined together? Less than the majority. All right, and this is where it's repopulated. Now, California was actually small in the numbers, but north. Now, please note when I had this other thing come on that it's not the same colors as the map. I couldn't find one that had the exact same colors. If you look at this, here's where the popular vote is, and here's where the Electoral College is. The green is Douglas. In all actuality, Douglas was second place in the popular vote. Electoral College, he only won a few states. Now, if you want to look at this in a realistic fashion, I have on here, who won the southern states? So who won them? Yeah, Breckinridge, by far. I mean, Breckinridge won the Deep South. Who won the northern states? Lincoln. All this in blue here. Who won the border states? That's John Bell, the Union Party. But who was the most national candidate? Basically, he was second place in almost every single state. Douglas. Okay, Douglas was basically, he was second place in the South. He was second place in the North. He was second place usually on the border states. And again, he had a lot of votes. He just, our official voting is done by the Electoral College. All right, Lincoln's elected. Some Southerners have said beforehand, oh, by the way, anyone know how many votes Abraham Lincoln got in the state of Florida?
3, 0.
None.
Matthew's right, 0. Why did he not get any votes in the state of Florida?
Slavery.
Well, he's not even on the ballot. Most other states he wasn't even allowed on the ballot. Okay, the Republican Party wasn't allowed on, which seems pretty odd when you think the strength of the Republican Party today is the Deep South.
doesn't seem
But the Republican Party started out as the party of the North.
It
Okay.
doesn't seem legal.
Well, don't worry about legal. Now, all that stuff, when we get to the Gilded Age, we really don't worry about legality when it comes to voting at that time. It would take us another 50 years later until we get to legal. All right, Lincoln was elected, but before he was inaugurated. He's elected in November, is not inaugurated until March. We will have 7 states secede. Anyone know the first state to secede? South Carolina. Remember that whole nullification crisis? They're still the main one being the rabble-rousers. You don't have to know this order of it, but here are the 7 Confederate states. We would have Mississippi, Florida, we're number 3. All right, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. So the deep, deep South, those 7 states break away. They make the capital of it Montgomery, Alabama. I think that's one of your questions on there is, what was the capital? The original capital was Montgomery, Alabama, which is, of those 7 states, almost exactly in the middle. It was a great place to have a capital. They elect a president, who is the Jefferson Davis is elected as president. Now later on, 4 more states would end up joining. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Now North Carolina, a lot of people, when you look at things, that probably didn't want to truly join, but then they were kind of surrounded by things in there and would not be seen as much of a southern state. The South would then move their capital from deep in the South to right near the border at Richmond, Virginia.
Virginia's kind of a bully moving everything around.
Why is it moved to Richmond, Virginia? Yeah, Virginia is the most powerful and most important of all the southern states. And there's another little reason for it. Is that kind of a little slap in the face to the north?
Yeah.
We're going to move our capital right next to you. All right, not only are we leaving, but as we're leaving, we're going to shoot you a bird. Okay, we're going to let you know, maybe start mooning you at the same time. All right, it's a little bit that we're going to have. Now, I have on here this question. What country looked like they had a more qualified president, the United States or the CSA? When you look on paper, if you were to have a resume, and I was to give you a resume of Jefferson Davis and a resume of Abraham Lincoln, you would look at things and say, Abraham Lincoln should never be president. His political career was 1 term as a Whig congressman. Remember that whole bloody spot resolution? That's the thing he's most famous for. Okay. Not very successful, not re-elected. Lincoln then went on. He was a failed businessman. He was a small town lawyer, but, well, some people said not a very good lawyer. Doesn't really matter at that time, but we know today that he probably was bipolar. He had some mental problems. He never was real successful with a whole lot. Military-wise, he was the commander of a local unit in the Black Hawk War, but that unit never even saw action. So they did some training in their town, and that was it. Meanwhile, Jefferson Davis is a business owner. All right, has one of the biggest plantations and one of the most successful plantations in the South. He had gone to West Point. He had been in the Mexican War as a hero. He had been Secretary of War. He had been a senator. He has a resume that looks really good. All right. All right. Here's a little side thing for you. Most of you, when you see a Southern flag, you think just this part right here. And this is where we kind of have in our parking lot for some people that want to be rabble-rousers about things. If you are a true Southerner, our original flag in the South was the Bonnie Blue flag. It's pretty boring, isn't it? And you'll see sometimes when people say heritage, not hate with the flag, well, that's not really true. If it's heritage, you would have this flag or this flag. Okay, 7 stars, and then it moves to 11 stars. All right, and this would be, for most times, a true Southern flag. Now, later on, we will have what is called the stainless banner. You would have what is the Southern Cross, if it is a true Southern Cross, and when people go waving it, it will be in a square, not in a rectangle. Okay? The stainless banner was the flag that in 1863 became famous. What's the problem with this flag right here that some people can see? Yeah, a lot of white. It looks like a flag of surrender. And when the South started losing a lot of battles in 1863, they didn't want to have something that looked like they were surrendering. So they had different versions. They put a big red stripe on it. They combined it together. But for the most part, what most of you think of as a Southern flag, all right, that battle flag was not the most famous flag. It became really famous, a lot more famous, especially as the rectangle, in the 1950s. What was going on in the 1950s that would make what? It's not Vietnam. The Civil Rights Movement. So it's kind of a reaction to that. So if you are, and this is where again, my family has been in Florida since before the Civil War. Okay, not too many families that are that way. But true history, here are your Southern flag. The stars and bars, all right, would be the most for a Southern flag. Okay, well, why are the 13 stars that were put here? Because it just matches. Actually, some people say, here are border states. Here's the key thing, the flag, that's more trivia. There are 4 border states, they are slave states that do not have slavery, that would not join with the South. And you need to know these 4 states. Okay, and this is not this is a you must know type of thing in here. Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. They all have slavery. They do not join the Confederacy. The area in the western part of Virginia did not want to have it. They break away from Virginia after Virginia breaks away from the United States, and they rejoin the United States. Thus is born West Virginia. Now, if you go to West Virginia, it's a lot of mountains. Is that good for plantations? So this is the area that this is the time, and this is the history of Virginia, going back all the way to Bacon's Rebellion. You will have this with the people that are living in the mountains compared to the people in the Tidewater area, the rich versus the lower class fighting each other along the way. But those 5 states are the border states. And this is where I have this question, and here I think I even wrote it in your note back then. All right, if slavery isn't the issue, as your elementary teacher told you, then why did they leave too? Or if slavery is the issue, I should say. Is that what you learned in elementary school? Why was the Civil War fought? Slavery. But if it was slavery, why did those 5 leave? Well, they had it. That was part of their economy. So what is the true issue? States' rights. But what right did these states want to have?
Slavery.
The right to slavery. So it all does come back to slavery. But the issue is, should each state be able to decide whether or not if they are slave or they are free? So right, it said it's
states' rights and slavery?
Well, it is states' rights, but what issue does the states want to have? But the official reason is states. When Abraham Lincoln would basically say that we're going to stay together, his reason for fighting the Civil War was that it is illegal for those states to leave. They're not allowed, not for slavery. All right? The issue of slavery officially will not be a reason until we get a year and a half into the war. At that time, when Lincoln knew that these border states would not leave, then the slavery would become the bigger issue. All right, one last thing in here. When you hear about the Civil War and brother versus brother, well, we do have a real case of this, and a senator who had 2 of his sons, one that became an officer in the Confederate Army, one that was an officer in the Union Army. But Senator Crittenden from Kentucky had proposed that a compromise. And it was a last-ditch effort trying to keep it together. It fails. There is no more compromising here. And this is where we are headed to the Civil War at that time. And then we have our lame duck president. For 5 months, Buchanan's still president. When the South's breaking away, those 7 states break away, what does Buchanan do? Yeah, absolutely nothing. He just paid. And this is one reason why a lot of people say Buchanan is our worst president.
What could he really do?
Well, this is where you kind of wonder, what could he have done? Things, I mean, militarily, could he have done things? Could he have reinforced some forts? Could he, so no one really knows for sure what he did, but he did nothing at all. And so that's why he comes down. All right, here is Lincoln's inaugural address. And the reason for us fighting the Civil War, in Abraham Lincoln's own word, was to preserve the Union. Okay, preserve the Union. And there, he asserted that just as he had taken the oath to preserve, protect, defend the United States. In there. But his closing, his speech, we are not enemies, but we must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, yet again touched, as surely will be the better angels of our nature. So again, that is the reason for the Civil War. All right, here's a little thing let's have our connections. When the South breaks for breaking away. And here's where, now you need to start putting this in your writing in here. It's not just what's at this time period. And remember what I said, if you ever get an essay question, by the way, the AP's got a lot easier. At one time, the whole essay question they had was on the Crittenden Compromise. If you didn't know the Crittenden Compromise, you weren't going to do real good on that question. Now they make it a lot broader on like what are the causes of the Civil War, and there instead of that specific on it. But the American Revolution, we break away from Britain. The South said we had the right to break away with it. Articles of Confederation. What is the name of the Southern States country? Confederate States of America. Now, did the Articles of Confederation work out for us as a government in the United States? No, we're going to find the same problems that the South would have. That loose union wouldn't work. Virginia-Kentucky resolutions, the idea of nullification. Would it be born with that? States don't have to obey a federal law. Essex Junto and Hartford Convention, because what area said if you don't like laws you can break away?
New England.
Yeah, New England. So the South's still copying New England here. And then in the tariff crisis, nullification issue with South Carolina. All right, that's the end of that section.
Just rest of it.